I'm Sam Munson, editorial director of the Octavian Report. It's my privilege today to introduce Elliot Ackerman, who is the author of the novels Waiting for Eden, Dark at the Crossing, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, and Green on Blue. And he has a new collection out, a collection of nonfiction, Places and Names. Elliot's writings have appeared in Esquire, in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New York Times Magazine, among many other venues. His stories have been included in the Best American Short Stories and the Best American Travel Writing. He is both a former White House Fellow and Marine, and served 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, where he received the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart. Thanks for being here with us, Elliot. To start with, I wanted to talk about a powerful piece you published recently in the Times about Donald Trump's pullout from Syria and its effect on the Kurdish fighters and communities just over the border there. How did you become interested in the Kurdish issue, and why do you think the U.S. relationship with the Kurds is important and worth commenting on?
First of all, thanks so much for having me, and thanks very much, Richard, and it's great to be with you all today. Well, I covered the Syrian civil war for about 3 years. I lived in Istanbul for that time, and so the Kurdish issue is obviously inextricably linked to the Syrian issue, particularly in northern Syria, where I spent a lot of time. So listen, our entire foreign policy is based on partnerships, and our partnership with the Kurds has been one that's been very central to the relative stability we've seen in the region, meaning northern Syria and Iraq, over the last couple of years as we've seen the decline of ISIS. So this immediate pullout from northern Syria and the subsequent, what I would call, betrayal of our Kurdish partners is an issue that not only has implications directly in that region, but also has broader implications across the Middle East for the precedent sets with regards to our partners. But to kind of go out one more level on this, I mean, there's an interesting conversation going on in this country right now, which is this pullout with the Kurds, and as we've seen these pretty dramatic drawdowns in Afghanistan are being done kind of under this rubric of let's end endless wars. And I think I and many other Americans are all for ending our endless wars. But what's difficult is when we conflate this idea of ending endless wars with widespread disengagement from the world. And so our engagement with the world, as Americans, we are this sort of city on a hill, and a lot's been written about that and discussed about that. But there's always been this tension all the way back to the country's founding, which is, are we a city on a hill that people should look at and then emulate without any help from us, which is sort of a Jeffersonian view of the world, or are we a city on a hill that should take that vision past our shores, which is sort of the Hamiltonian version of the world? And that tension is one that has always existed and will continue to exist in our foreign policy, but that is a different conversation than the conversation of let's end endless wars. And so kind of what's happening now is if you have more of a Hamiltonian view of the world, which is that we should be trying to export some of our values and bring them to the world, then you are for perpetuating endless war. And I don't think that's necessarily fair.
Well, thank you for that incisive and profound answer. It leads into my next question, which is, you are a critically acclaimed novelist. Your newest book, though, is a work of nonfiction, which is based on your experiences as a Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan and as a journalist in and around Syria. What is it about those experiences that propelled you this time into the medium of nonfiction?
Well, I think listen. Ultimately, I think all writing is you're trying to to attain some sense of truth. What is the truth of any situation, and you have different tools. And so I think fiction is more the art of. It's not the art of what happened, but it's sort of the art of like what could have happened and what should have happened. Whereas nonfiction, and I work as a journalist, is different. It's sort of an act of inclusion. What am I going to include in this piece of nonfiction writing to get at the essential aspects of the events that I'm trying to convey? So I work in both mediums, and it just sort of seemed obvious eventually that I would do a book of nonfiction.
The title is I find at least, very evocative. It sort of has almost kind of an Auden-esque ring to it. I was curious if you could talk about how you came up with it and what it means to you.
Well, I think we have 15 minutes, and there's sort of a long anecdote for how the title came up, and I'll be like eating into everybody's coffee time, so I don't want to do that. If you're interested, pick up the book. That part's right at the beginning of the book. But it kind of comes down to this notion, and I'm not the first person to have written this, but that when you get to the back end of a war and having had those experiences, a lot of the words we associate with wars, with the reasons we fight wars, with the valor and glory that some people say comes along with war. I mean, it all kind of falls by the wayside, and what you are sort of left with, the only thing that really feels true are, as the title of the book, Places and Names, insinuates, are the places that you were, the names of the people that were there, and then probably in the dates. So it's just trying to say that this is kind of the essential nature of the experience.
Your answer puts me in mind of a quote from the Chilean-Mexican novelist Roberto Bolaño, who once wrote in his masterwork 2666, "Memory is love." Is there any truth to that?
The memory is love? Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think, and I think, war, there's a lot of love in war that people don't necessarily get at. For instance, in my time in the Marine Corps, I saw a lot of people do a lot of very, very brave things. I saw Marines, run out into a street that was covered with a machine gun where one Marine had been shot to go get their friend. I mean, I've seen guys run into houses. And ultimately, you start asking yourself, why do these people do these things? And it's not because they're brave, right? Like, bravery is not an emotion. You don't feel brave. You feel fear. Like, I know what it feels like to be very afraid. So what is the opposite of fear? Why do these people do these very courageous things for one another? And I would argue that it's love. They feel a lot of love for each other. But there's this sort of very nasty paradox that exists in war. So you have a group of folks, in my experience it was always men, but they get together and they're part of a unit. That unit trains for, let's say, 6 months or a year to go to a war zone together. When they're training, they're building these bonds. You could call it camaraderie or esprit de corps. I think those are all just other words for love. You're building this type of fraternal love for one another. And you have to build that love so that these individuals, Marines, will do these extremely brave things for one another in combat situations in order to achieve a mission. Because it's always in service of this mission. The mission is always more important than the people who've been tasked to do it. Because if the mission wasn't more important, you would never go on the mission, because some of you are going to probably die in the service of this mission. So the mission comes first. So if you are a leader in any position of authority, from the 20-year-old corporal up to the 4-star general, so much of your job in achieving this mission requires you to give orders to people that you love that will get them killed. So in some respects, the height of the military experience is training up, building these bonds of love, and then you being asked to step on the battlefield and destroy the very thing that you love. And people come home from war, and we hear about things like PTSD and other traumas. And I think it's very obvious, right? These are people whose hearts have broken, and your heart can't break if you weren't in love.
You've said to us before on a podcast we did that even though you are kind of identified, I think to some extent by the critical community as a war writer, you think that that's sort of a limiting designation. I was curious if you could talk a bit about how you understand the war novel versus the novel sort of tout court.
I think when you say war writer, what people think is like you're writing books that have extended chapters on like the intricacies of a tank battle, and that's not the type of writing I do. Most of my books are pretty intimate and are about relationships. And I think one of the things though that if you go to war is you kind of get at a young age, or at least I felt this real wide-angle view of what we are capable of as humans. From the most, as I mentioned, the most extreme acts of courage and love to the most extreme acts of violence and depravity. So with that understanding, I've always felt that, if there is war in my book, it's not that I'm writing about war. I actually feel like I'm using war to write about other things. And there's a long history of this, of how we classify books, particularly in American literature. Like there's certain books that I would say are war novels that we don't think of as war novels. Like one I think we discussed is The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is a war novel. The way Gatsby meets Daisy Buchanan is he's wearing his uniform, and that's how she doesn't know she's poor. I mean, if you read that book, the First World War is all over it. And the other one that never gets categorized as a war novel, which I would say is certainly a war novel, is The Catcher in the Rye. The Catcher in the Rye is a war novel. If you know anything about J.D. Salinger, I mean, J.D. Salinger landed in the first wave at D-Day. He liberated the concentration camps. He never wrote directly about his Second World War experience. But if you listen to that voice, right, that famous voice we all know of Holden Caulfield, he's wandering around New York City. Everybody's a phony. He doesn't like anybody. I read that book. That's the voice of a very cynical veteran. And if you read the last line of that book, the last line I'm paraphrasing is, I believe it's, never tell anybody anything. Otherwise, you wind up missing everyone. And that's the end of the book. So, I think it's important to kind of reflect back on certain great works of literature and be like, war is something we've always done as a country. We don't view ourselves this way, but we're a pretty highly militarized nation. And so if you look at our literature, particularly in the 20th century, so many of these writers were touched by war. Actually, I think so many that you didn't even notice how influential it was on their work.
We're very short on time. Before we go, I wanted to ask you, you have a new book coming out in the summer?
In May.
In May, Red Dress in Black and White.
Yes.
A novel of intrigue and sort of geopolitics in Istanbul. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and about its genesis.
Well, as I mentioned, I lived in Istanbul for many years. The novel is set around the Gezi Park protests in 2013, but it's about an American woman who is married to a Turkish real estate developer, but she is fleeing the city, and the whole book takes place over a course of a day, and she's fleeing the city with her American lover, who's a photographer. But sort of the twist of the book is that the real hero of the novel is the Turkish real estate developer husband. So
a daring twist
yeah,
these
daring
days.
twist.
Well, thank you so much for
you.
being here with us, Elliot. It's been excellent. And I'm going to escort Elliot off, and then we will be joined by Edward Felsenthal of Time Magazine and Prime Minister Jose Maria Aznar of Spain. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.